that we have had Aerospike customer's perspective, it's now time for a partner's perspective as well. We're going to invite an esteemed partner from Mindgate Solutions, Mr. Guhan Muthuswamy, co-founder and chief architect, Mindgate Solutions, onto the stage. A round of applause for sir.
Hi, good morning to everyone, all Aerospike community. I'm able to see the customers, partners, engineers, developers. Thanks everyone for this opportunity. So Avik spoke about the India stack, followed by Subbu about what India is making a difference without how the transactions are happening. Ramesh has been an inspiring person for the day one. So we have been doing a lot of work in real-time payments. Today, that the context of my talk is more on how we are part of this real-time payments, how Aerospike is contributing for it sort of a thing. So today everybody knows UPI close to 14.96 trillion rupees transactions, and it's a growth of almost 41%, and transaction amount in terms of it close to 31% of the transactions every month, close to 6 to 7% goes on high on the UPI volumes. And this is the most important thing on this data point is basically predominantly we work along with partner banks like SBI, HDFC and multiple banks. And the thing is, as Ramesh also has clearly mentioned, how the banks are shifting from the traditional platforms which are legacy created over a period of time to all this new generation platform which gives them the scale and high resilience sort of a thing. That's the area we want to focus across. So if you see this across, this is one of the important data point. So last month, everybody knows 14 billion transaction has happened across sort of a thing. In this, close to Mindgate has been doing close to 50% of the UPI transactions in part of this sort of a thing. You see there's two graphs, one is the remitter, another is the beneficiary. Remitter is the issuer bank transactions, which happens across sort of a thing. And then there's the beneficiary transactions, because every transaction has a debit and a credit. If it is a person-to-person transfer, it is typically both the things you will find it across. In case of a person-to-merchant transactions, it will be probably a merchant acquiring transaction that comes across sort of a thing. So a beneficiary could be a merchant or a person. In this case, slowly, if you see these across, a lot of transactions are happening it across. 7.2 billion transactions has gone across in this perspective. The acquiring transactions are there. This is more from the Mindgate partner banks data, whatever that we are doing it across. We power overall close to 50% of these transactions. So Aerospike use cases in our UPI architecture, traditionally when we started the UPI in 2016-17, it used to be a few lakhs, then went into millions and then crores, and multiple things that started happening it across. So as we progress, it was a highly database intensive platform when we started the UPI also in the beginning of it across. Over the period of time, the way at which the UPI has scaled across, we consciously cut down the number of RDBMS calls, how to use in memory much more within this sort of a thing. Today UPI, as all of you are aware about it, it has got a completely asynchronous message-based ecosystem. But then the banking system perspective, the credit debit, you need to ensure the transaction integrity. If it is any other use case, it would have been much simpler. But if it is a financial transaction, everybody is bothered about money, right? That's how that it is there. So the debit happens, the credit has to happen, otherwise it has to roll back. All those things has to happen much seamlessly to the people, or that before the settlement happens across, how do you handle it across sort of a thing. So we use for multiple use cases of this. One of the key things when we approached Aerospike, in fact, Ramesh and we go for a long time, close to 2 decades, told across we are planning to use Aerospike. He was the first one to encourage us to do that across. And one of the key areas we have been targeting across is how to keep it active. That's one of the key asks. That's one of the primary asks from all these things, basically. Apart from that, we see these across, many of you spoke about the fraud and other things or the UPI transaction. Within that split of a second or a second transaction that you are doing it across, there are multiple things has to happen at the back of it, basically. At least we exchange close to 23 or to 30 messages exchanges. We do that across systems, across the ecosystems, multiple subsystems of the bank to have this one transaction to happen it across everything. So there are multiple use cases that is there. I just want to pick up one use case. That's what I just want to briefly talk about it, and then we'll come back about the other use cases. So this is something we say that across the NPCI, who is hosting that UPI as the core platform, and every bank has got their own switch which orchestrates this transaction. And here there are multiple messages are there. So we define this thought process perspective is in 3 layers, whether it's an MPU or TPU or EPU, mainly message processor, because all these things are asynchronous messages, but the transaction has to happen across. So when the message comes across, previously that there's always a request and there is an ACK goes across. So we have cut down many of these layers. How do we fast we can give it across and everything. So we provide that MPU layer, how does the request, validate the request, and then give the response back fast as an ACK to that across. So though NPCI has given 30 seconds as the thing, these things are nowadays happening in milliseconds now. That's how the transactions are happening it across. And second is, once actually you process the transaction, you've got a lot of circulars or fraud validations or the regulatory guidelines which we need to validate across. Pretty much like predominant of that velocity checks happens in that layer it across everything. So that we do that across that all these velocity checks at the real time and then give it across to the subsystems like core banking and the middlewares where that credit and debit happens across. Remember in UPI, there are very few banks where the credit and debit happens in the same bank. Most of the cases the credit happens in one bank, debit happens in another bank, as you know that across everything. So as we do that across this transaction validation and all this verifications, we do that across the transaction processing layer. And then again there is also a event processor sort of a thing. Apart from this, that whatever the velocity checks we do at our platform layer, we also integrate with the risk management system of the bank, which has got the data point across channels, across systems sort of a thing. So all these things has to come in fraction of milliseconds. Okay, so if you don't get that, all those things, your experience when you go to a chai wala or anything, your experience of paying it across in a second will not happen. So there are multiple systems, multiple ecosystem providers who come, and we have to orchestrate along with them to ensure this happens across. Apart from that, there is also regulatory guidelines are there. How do you give the notifications to the customer, whether there's a debit happen, is it goes on time, all those things that we have to ensure that across. So there are also, whenever we talk about various fraud and other things perspective, NPCA also has got its own fraud and risk score engine. They provide the score, and we also do that across. The new generations, whatever we are doing it across, we correlate all this data now between our system and the NPCA data system and the bank system and throw that accordingly sort of a thing. So now this has become a multiple things, and we do that across. Of course, we use multiple platforms like Kafka and other things for the streaming of the data for the subsystems. But Aerospike has become a very, very important in this journey of this transaction. You see, a single transaction, the multiple touch points, we do that in Aerospike more than the OLTP. In fact, our DB calls used to be close to 43 DB calls in a transaction. Now we have reduced to only 2 just to persist the transaction. Rest everything we move to the in-memory layer. That's a big difference between that sort of a thing. So because as we progress, some of the large banks, we process close to 200 million financial transactions in a day and 100 million non-financial transactions a day. So to scale up, it is very, very important to handle that across. So coming back on this, so this is predominantly we see that across in a real-time transactions, all this asynchronous to synchronous, or the alerts notification, or the in-flight transaction processing, or the transaction velocity checks, and then transaction history, because most of the people wants to see the transaction history very quickly. If I go to the core bank and get it across, we will not get faster. So we need to show the transaction history much faster. And then how do you do this active-active across these things? Ramesh beautifully explained how the data centers are distributed, how the latencies are put across and everything. But as a solution, it has to support this all these available things. So we ensure that it is there. So today we process that financial transaction in our switch less than 100 milliseconds purely from the switch. If you add the subsystems and other things are there, it has to be around somewhere around 300 to 400 milliseconds. It has to finish it across. Sub-second it has to finish. Then only the end customer gets that the value of it across. So with this, I just want to add one thing. India is targeting towards 1 billion UPI transaction. Of course, by 2026 is the target sort of a thing. And the way it is going across, a lot of use cases are coming across. Last week, GFF, lot of use cases are launched across. The delegate payments has come across, embedded payments has come across. And secondary markets is a very strong use case that will come across. And auto top up on UPI Lite. Today, many of you might be using that UPI Lite for small value transactions, sort of a thing. But how do you top it up automatically using the auto pay feature? Those things have come up across. And credit on UPI, because nowadays the way that you use the bank accounts, you also use the credit card on UPI or credit on UPI. Both the things have become reality. So typically, previously we used to say, we have to carry a cash, or you have to go to the ATM, you need a debit card, or credit card, you need a card with RuPay cards. I think a lot of things that you could be able to do on the credit on the UPI mobile itself, basically. In fact, one of our credit card provider partners, the bank's perspective, they say one out of the two cards today issued is a RuPay credit card, because the UPI is enabling them in a much simpler and better way. That makes India more positive, more self-reliant on this sort of a thing. So today the platform, what we have is a high scale, and it is completely near 0% technical decline. Recently I was talking with Ramesh, he was saying across the technical decline has become 0.001, 0.0001. That sort of a numbers we are able to achieve because that the platforms are supported by a strong in-memory architectures. Okay, that's very important. And the uptime of 99.99% has become very evident today, because this is much more, because today the experience makes the difference. Whatever be the platform, whatever be the technology you use across, unless you provide the response time much faster and systems are available and resilient, it is not going to cause any benefit to anybody. So whatever the scale that is happening it across, because these are all happening in the run of the mill. At least in a year, we support close to 39 guidelines or operation circulars from central bank. It does not happen anywhere in the world. In every world, if you see this across, there could be 4 changes or 5 changes, the regulatory may be giving it across in a year. But in India, it is close to 32 to 39 changes, small, medium, large, all those sizes, it comes across everything. For an event like a GFF, all these features are all conceived in 45 days, implemented, rolled out, flawlessly demonstrated, sort of a thing. So this is how India is moving at a very, very phenomenal pace and speed, sort of a thing. And we are proud to say that we are very happy to partner with Aerospike on this, because many of these possibilities, it is very important to have a very reliable platform, a technology, because the day from one we met Srini, the way he was convincing why it is there, we did so many POCs. It's not that we just jumped into Aerospike for the sort of a thing. We did so many POCs, why it is that there are so many in many platforms that we are spoiled with choices today. To be very frank, so many choices are available. And the completely this reliability and the transaction response time in active mode, we found Aerospike as far superior when compared to many other platforms. That's one of the primary reasons that we could be able to take it for it. That's the reason we are doing it across. From May 20 to May 24, if we see this transaction volume, it is a 13x growth in 4 years. If May 24 to 25 end, if we are or 26 earlier, if we do even a 3.x growth, it will be a 1 billion transactions. So in fact, last GFF, the RBI governor set the target of 100 billion transactions. That's how that they are moving it across. A billion transaction per day and 100 billion transaction per month that they are talking about it. So the goalpost keeps on going based on the usage we do that across. Thanks a lot. Thanks for the amazing technology.
Thank you, Mr. Guhan. Requesting you to please step onto the stage. Also requesting Mr. Avik to please hand over the token of appreciation. Thank you, Mr. Guhan, for an open revelation on how it is to work with Aerospike to develop.